Thank you for attending the DEIA and Data Professionals Session 5A at the RDAP Summit 2024. This is a Zoom webinar, so attendees are muted and your cameras are turned off except for panelists. To ask a question, please use the Q&A at the bottom of the screen. The session will run from 3:15 to 4:15 Eastern Time, with the last 15 minutes or so for some Q&A and wrap up. But after the session, please feel free to drop questions and continue the conversation in the session chat in Feedloop. The RDAP Summit organizers are committed to providing an environment where all attendees can participate fully in the program and activities without fear of harassment or discriminatory behavior of any kind. There is a code of conduct helper available during the session, and that's Rachel Woodbrook. So you can direct messages to them in Feedloop if you need assistance, and she can give you the code of conduct email address or the link to the incident report forum if needed. And then I'm just going to copy some of this information into chat as well. Just take a moment to do that. Okay. So I'm going to go ahead and move my slides forward. So the plan for today is somewhat unstructured, but we are going to give a brief overview of the DEIA training workshops that occurred. Each of the panelists, who are all participants in the workshops, will give brief introductions of ourselves. And then we have a list of prepared questions that we're going to ask of the panelists. Not everyone may answer each question depending on timing, but we'll have some discussion there. And then we do want to have time for some Q&A from the audience, and then a couple of wrap-up slides about some resources and next steps. So to give you an overview, so we did recently a series of training workshops. I'm just pulling up my notes. So this was a series of 3 workshops that were offered by Sophia Long. So Sophia Long is a first-generation Chinese-American librarian, facilitator, and educator, and the principal of the Do Better, Be Better LLC. And her work employs critical race theory and emergent strategy principles. And the DEIA Action Committee proposed hiring her to conduct the training because of her experience in libraries. And we also received positive feedback about her when we kind of crowdsourced recommendations about DEI trainings from the RDAP community. The trainings were also co-facilitated by Deborah Young Caldwell, who is the Data Services Librarian at the University of North Texas. And she is also a member of the RDAP DEIA Action Committee. And there was technical support by Jen Brown. So these 3 workshops covered a range of topics, kind of providing foundations of DEIA kind of literacies for the attendees. So the first one addressed foundations of white supremacy and racism in libraries. The second one covered identity and positionality. And the third one was about working with alternative frameworks such as critical race theory. And the first 2 workshops were 3 hours long. The last one was 4 hours with a half-hour break. And then another important component of this training was that it coordinated unlearning and accountability partners, or UAPs, as part of this process. So these were either pairs or groups of 3 that met both before the first workshop and then in between each workshop to discuss a series of readings and talk about how we were applying these principles in our work. And part of the rationale for that is to start really building community and be able to support each other in these topics. A little bit of more details about how this worked. We did cap participation at 40 participants due to the highly interactive nature of the training. All RDAP members were eligible. We publicized the training via the RDAP email list. We got uptake from 21 participants, so it was a bit of a smaller group, but that was kind of helpful for facilitating discussions. And attendance was very good. We only had a few people who had to miss for various reasons or another. We did collect racial identity of participants in order to allow the assignment of BIPOC-only unlearning and accountability partners if people preferred. If they identified as BIPOC, we gave them the option of being paired with another BIPOC UAP. And it turned out that that preference didn't come up, but we were able to see that about 90% of participants identified as white, which is kind of consistent with the typical demographics of our community, and that's kind of reflected in the panel, the panelist identities. So if that's kind of an elephant in the room, this isn't a talk about DEIA, all of our panelists are white. This was a reflection of who was participating in the workshop. So we're going to go around and do some panelist introductions before we get to the discussion questions. So we'll try to keep these brief. So I can start. I'm Mara Sedlins. I'm at Colorado State University as the data management specialist. And let's see, I'm on the traditional and ancestral homelands of the Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Ute nations and peoples. And I was interested in attending the training as co-chair of the RDAP Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, and Anti-Racism Action Committee. I was involved in organizing it and am strongly invested in its goal of providing a common foundational understanding of DEIA concepts and building leadership and community to drive change in a predominantly white profession. So I will pass it off. See if one of the other panelists would like to jump in and introduce themselves.
I can go ahead and go.
Thank you.
My name is Lisa Chin. I am at the University of Nebraska Medical Center in Omaha, Nebraska. The University of Nebraska is a public land grant institution with campuses and programs across the state that reside on the past, present, and future homelands of the Pawnee, Ponca, Oto, Missouri, Omaha, Dakota, Lakota, Arapaho, Cheyenne, and Kaw peoples, as well as the relocated Ho-Chunk, Winnebago, Iowa, and Sac and Fox peoples. And the goals for participating in the training were a couple of different things, partly because we don't necessarily think of our jobs as overlapping with a lot of DEI training and conversations. And so it was a really good way to, if not start those conversations, really flesh out where we see those conversations going in the future. What are some of the ethical imperatives around fair and care sharing that we can put into place? And then also being in, for me personally, in Nebraska, there have been quite a few bills put forth in the legislature to get rid of DEI on the University of Nebraska campuses, and really thinking through how DEI is incredibly important for every single one of our positions.
Thank you, Lisa. Deb, could you introduce yourself next, please?
Hello, I am Deb McCaffrey. I work for Arizona State University, but I live in Ann Arbor, Michigan, which is on the traditional territories of the Anishinaabe people of the Three Fires Confederacy, the Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi, and the Wyandot. And my goal for participating in this workshop was getting some very specific recommendations for my job and not just kind of general DEI training.
Maybe we can go to Jen next.
Sure, thanks. Hi, everybody. I'm Jen Ferguson. I work for Northeastern University, and my workplace and the place I live are on the native lands of the Massachusetts and Pawtucket people. I signed up for the workshop primarily because I find myself leading a small department in which most of the folks are members of marginalized groups. And I want to be the best possible advocate for them that I can be, so that they can bring their whole selves to work and hopefully be happy and productive.
Thank you. Let's go to Lucy next.
Hi, my name is Lucy Carr-Jones. I'm at the University of Virginia in Charlottesville, which is on the homeland of the Monacan people. So I was interested in this training, I think, because of the structure and how extensive and sort of in-depth it was. I'd taken sort of similar kind of one-shot, a couple hour-long trainings, and I just kind of was curious about what more I could learn in this sort of setting, with this sort of extended discussion time.
Thank you. And Wanda, please.
Hey everyone, my name is Wanda Marsalik. My pronouns are they, them. I'm a data curation librarian at the University of Minnesota, which is located on the contemporary, traditional, and ancestral lands of the Dakota and Anishinaabe peoples. And I was interested in participating in the training to learn with and from others in the field, and also want to be a part of this change that we're making here.
Great. I think I've got all the panelist introductions. So at this point, I'm going to stop screen sharing so we can see each other a little bit better and pass it off to Lisa to moderate the questions.
Awesome. Perfect. All right. So for if Wanda and Jen want to speak first on this first question, can you share specific examples from the workshops that highlighted unequitable practices affecting staff and library users of color, and how you plan to address these issues within the RDAP community?
Go for it, Wanda.
Okay, all right. So, yes, I can share. But for some specifics, we had a practice in the workshop. It was called WAIT, W-A-I-T. It stands for Why Am I Talking and Why Am I Still Talking? And this was really important to me because I feel like I share a lot. I get uncomfortable when no one else is sharing, and so I want to fill that space. But sometimes we need that space. We need to feel that discomfort. And for forever and still, it's white people's feelings that are always being centered, and we need to make space for others, different ways of thinking and learning and participating. And so that was really, really important to me. So WAIT. Also, diving into the white supremacy culture characteristics by Tema Okan. Sorry, Tema. And so that's really to help us have a shared understanding, and that we all need to read this. We all need to have this in the forefront of our mind. We can't do anything if we're just sitting there and not calling out these things. There's white supremacy all over libraries when it comes to perfectionism, paternalism, power hoarding, things like that. We need to talk about these. We need to shout them out, and we need to counter them. But we can't do that if we don't know what they are and we don't understand them. And some of them are deeper than just the words. Worship of the written word, as Deborah and Sophia said, we're not getting rid of books. That's not what that means. There's just other ways. And then I wanted to just mention that Audre Lorde, in one of our readings, talked about one of the reasons that white people have such difficulty reading Black women's work is because of their reluctance to see Black women as women and different from themselves. We need to be aware of intersectionality, and we need to be able to bring our whole selves. Jen.
Thanks. Yeah, some of what I say will definitely be related to what you just said, Wanda. One of the readings we did for the workshop included a quote, and I believe it was originally from Peggy McIntosh, where the writer described white privilege as an invisible package of unearned assets, and then sort of goes on to embroider on this idea by describing it a little bit more depth as it's like you're carrying around an invisible, weightless knapsack that has special provisions and maps and passports and code books and visas and clothes and tools and blank checks. And I think for me, this quote, more than anything I've ever read to this point, drove home to me. Sorry. What these inequitable practices feel like and look like. I move around the world with this invisible knapsack at my disposal. I don't even know that I have it, but it smooths my path. And I'm thinking back to that quote pretty often. And it helps me sort of frame some of the things I see at work in a different way. Like, what do I have at my disposal in this scenario that other people don't have? And I offer that up because it might be a useful reframing for other folks too.
Absolutely. Thank you both for your thoughts on that. And don't forget also that we do have a Q&A. We may or may not be able to get to the Q&A at the end there. If not, we can always move this conversation over to Feed Loop as well. Okay, so the next question is for Deb, Jen, and Lucy. In what ways do you envision incorporating the DEIA concepts learned during the workshops into your daily work as data professionals? And Deb, you unmuted first, so I'm going to call on you.
Yeah, so one that really stuck out to me and I just cannot get out of my brain was this kind of tenet of white supremacy of worship of the written word. And right, so what it means is that white supremacist culture puts an emphasis on things that are written down as opposed to like oral storytelling and oral knowledge transfer. That's what it's really getting at. But my brain's very literal, and it always takes me on a tangent when I think about it, about written word versus preservation. So that's something I've been more cognizant of is there's really a difference between preservation and the worship of the written word. And kind of just one small thing I've already started doing is when I'm speaking, I'm trying to replace written down with recorded or preserved or something like that. But just in more general, like thinking about, so I work more on the IT side, so I always think about like the literal data files, and just it's all just files. So it's something that I need to pay closer attention to, is like is in this larger context, it's not just files.
So one concept that resonated with me was something Wanda brought up, but the white supremacy principles, and also thinking about critical race theory and the sort of idea that racism is ordinary. So I think it's a little mental shift if you think about kind of everything around you and sort of your own workplace as being embedded in that. And one exercise we did was sort of thinking about what we considered when we were creating new services or policies at work. And I think that's sort of a useful exercise when you're thinking about all of these ideas being embedded in how we normally do things, and sort of, is there a reason that this needs to be done this way, or is this just sort of the nature of the system we're in? So I think just thinking more critically about the reasons for making decisions. Another concept we touched on was sort of the matrix of power and kind of who has power and privilege in our institution and whose needs are prioritized. So those are a few different sort of large concepts that I hope to bring to my work.
Yeah, I'll just tag on quickly and try not to cry this time. It goes back to something that Deb said about that prioritizing the written word. and the reason that I signed up for this workshop was, again, to try to be the best advocate for my people that I could be. I've always thought of myself as a flexible person, but after learning a bit more about white supremacy culture characteristics, I've realized that I have some baked in tendencies that really tie back to those. And one of those is the prioritizing the written word, prioritizing emails versus verbal interactions. I lean towards valuing efficiency and being focused on, getting things done. And moving forward, I want to keep firmly in mind, I love this concept that we talked about in the workshop, that there's always enough time for the right work. And by the right work in this case, I mean taking time for those small humanizing interactions between people, with people, and valuing the people and the relationships, I guess you could say the process, at least as much as the outcome or the product.
Yeah, excellent. Does anyone else want to chime in on this question? Or no? Okay. So the next question, in your opinion, what role should leadership play in championing and supporting the integration of DEIA principles into the core competencies of data professionals within RDAP? And this question is directed more towards Deb and Mara.
Yeah, I can go ahead and start. I think incorporating the work of diversity, equity, inclusion, and anti-racism into what we do is everyone's responsibility. But RDAP leadership has the opportunity to embed DEIA principles into the everyday operations and policies of the organization. So really bringing in that idea of, we've always kind of done things a certain way, but being free to interrogate that and think about how things could be done differently. And they also have the ability to empower next steps. So kind of enabling platforms and spaces to continue conversation and community building in these topics. Or one idea could be to maybe charge a task force to start pulling together existing resources on applying DEIA principles to data professionals' work. I know that, we shared a bunch of resources during the workshop, and there are other groups working on these topics. So making sure that we know about those, and then potentially developing new resources to support the RDAP community in applying principles to our work. I think that, remaining aware of existing efforts, both among RDAP committees, as well as groups beyond RDAP, can be important for preventing duplication of efforts and also building community beyond RDAP as well.
Yep, and just to quickly add on a bit there, like this is just leadership in general. They need to be actually doing the work. They can't just delegate this. They need to be the ones like seen at webinars or attending trainings. And then also just with the idea of like keeping track of other efforts and kind of starting up our own efforts, kind of what the bottom line I took away was like, we need to tear everything down and start again, which is very radical, but that's what needs to happen. So just embrace the radicalness and go for it.
Excellent. Does anyone else want to chime in on this one? All right, we will move on to the next question. How can the insights and experiences gained from the workshop be translated into actionable steps to foster a more inclusive and equitable environment for data professionals in RDAP? It's fairly similar to the question before, but maybe with a little bit of a tweak to talk more specifically about different avenues that we have. And that question is directed towards Jen and Wanda.
Yeah, I can get things rolling here. And I'll say that I'm obviously much more familiar with my own working environment than I am with like the inner workings of RDAP. And so I think I mostly reflected on this question with that context. But one of the things that came to mind when I was thinking about this question was somebody mentioned earlier, it might have been you, Wanda, that we read some Audre Lorde for this workshop. And she has this great passage where she's, setting up the intersectionality argument. And she says, I think I have the quote here, white women face the pitfall of being seduced into joining the oppressor, in this case, the white man, under the pretense of sharing power. And I don't know if these characteristics are at play at RDAP, but now that I have read that passage and digested it, I can certainly think of instances where I've noticed it at my workplace. And I can think of a couple of times when I did exactly that. I knuckled under rather than make a fuss in the spirit of going along. And I probably told myself I was trying to go along, but I wonder whether an ulterior motive wasn't to try to be seen as part of that power apparatus. So I intend to be more wary of that pitfall going forward.
Well, we have to do the work. We know this. We can read all day. Just like we can learn R, we can learn Python, we can read about it. Doesn't mean anything when you go to do it. If you you have to practice this, right? And so we have to practice anti-racism. So how do we do that? A great start would be for everyone to read Knowledge Justice by Sophia Lang and Jorge Lopez McKnight, and their supporting authors. Even the introduction to this book is amazing. I've been a part of a group where the entire group just read the introduction, and the white folks on the group had a better understanding, and the people of color had words to put to their feelings, and that they were not the only one, that they're not alone. And so I think that could be a great start. We could do something like that. And I bring that up because Audre Lorde also says that the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. We have to look to non-white folks to help us with this. Doesn't mean that we're expecting them to do all the work, but we need help and guidance. And from another reading that we did, that there was this quote, "It is all our responsibilities as settlers, especially those of us who descended from European colonizers, to challenge the systems of domination from which we benefit. So we need to be squeaky wheels. We need to use our privilege that we have, even though it sometimes feels gross, we have it, let's use it. Be the squeaky wheel, change those policies, bring it up with folks that have the power to make the changes. We need to be lobbying for this together, and use our privilege to help break down the awful structures and systems that we have in place."
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Wanda and Jen. Jen, I kind of wanted to also, both you and Wanda spoke to something that I've been thinking a lot about lately too, in slightly different terms, but the way that we, and kind of more expansive beyond RDAP, but the way that our jobs, as we do them every day, we are always kind of, if we're in libraries, we're couched in this language of services or collaborators, right? And so that language in and of itself can be problematic when we we're always thinking about, oh, how can I be of service to this or this or this, rather than reflecting and taking a step back and making decisions based on what we know is right, what we have learned in this workshop and what we can take away from it. And I think that that's something I'm still thinking about a lot, and ways to be that squeaky wheel and to not just do something because we are in these particular positions. And it's hard, right? It's not always easy to do that work either, when there are lots of other structures beyond us that are at play as well.
Sorry, can I add something to this?
Yeah,
so something
absolutely.
I was thinking about, especially thinking about the conference theme of interoperability. I think, kind of a lot of what we do is sort of counseling people on how to conform to existing standards in some way. And obviously there are reasons for that, but also that is a little bit at odds with what we've all been saying about sort of needing to question and needing to think critically, and what are the benefits of making something play well with all these other systems versus, are those systems compromised, and is that really something we should be recommending? So just an idea I had moving through this.
Yeah, even the language of normalization, right? That's a little bit problematic, especially when you're talking through questions of justice around and equity around LGBTQ plus issues. Amy S. says in the comments, I hope everyone saw this. I think this is really great. I think we should rethink the term squeaky wheel. Yeah, absolutely. I've been thinking next time I hear someone else referred to as a squeaky wheel, my response will be, and I'm their car horn. Yes, absolutely.
So you're muted.
Yes, I am. The next question for Wanda and Mara. How can the RDAP community collectively measure progress and success in achieving its DEIA goals, especially in relation to the development of core competencies for data professionals?
So I think, pulling up some notes I had, an important next step is to kind of continue to organize and support work in this area. Again, to assess what's already been done. We had a great list of kind of community crowdsourced resources that might be a good starting place. But then also, identify how RDAP can best contribute to that and kind of define these competencies for ourselves and our community. And I struggle with this because, I mean, a default deliverable for that kind of project would be to have a written document or report that can be shared. And again, I think about the tension between the value of that and then this idea of the worship of the written word. So that may not be the only output that would be valuable. But I would want to, see that there's room for community feedback on that kind of set of competencies, some kind of way to keep it up to date over time. But I could also see, community building efforts like webinars or town halls to continue to discuss these ideas and collaborate together. I think I see a lot of work already being done as part of RDAP's activities. So there was a recent webinar on methodological inclusiveness in data services that came up in conversation several times during the training. I know there are also a lot of efforts to improve the accessibility of RDAP Summit presentations, or the RDAP Journal Club has discussed articles that relate to DEIA topics. So if there's a way to kind of harness the outcomes of these activities into that kind of guiding document, that could help identify next steps or maybe gaps in our thinking that we need to pursue further. I think, yeah, another goal that we started trying to address, but I was looking at, a draft RDAP strategic plan, and something that's been discussed is really needing to create a more welcoming environment for groups who are underrepresented. So I think that's an important DEIA goal to think about. How do we measure success in that area? So I think there are still some questions to talk about, but there are a lot of good directions I see that we could go.
More or less what Mara said. We need to continue offering the training. It would be great if everyone would take it, everyone that has the ability to, the time. I'm lucky to work at an institution that allows me to do this, to be a part of RDAP and things like that. And so I understand that's not for everyone, but we all need to have these basic understandings to be able to move forward. We need to get more people involved. We need to have more mentors so that way that our existing mentors don't burn out. There's always much more of certain people that are being asked to do this work. And at the same time, people need to be able to see themselves. And so I don't know how you fix that. And just, we need to also admit to ourselves that this is going to take time. People have been doing this work for years. It takes a lot of time to gain trust. And so this isn't going to be like a checklist. We've tried checklists. They don't work. They actually make us stand still more, I think. And we just have to really, the community, I think white folks in the community just need to be able to be okay with making mistakes, make mistakes and learn from them. We all fell off, or most likely all fell off of a bike when we first started to learn, and that's how we knew not to do that certain thing again. And that's just like this, we're going to make mistakes, we learn from them. I've probably made a ton of mistakes in this talk already, and maybe people are learning from that. I don't know, but if we make mistakes, we apologize. We're giving each other grace, but we need to go beyond that and just, it's hard. It's hard. If we want this place to be as welcoming as we say it is, then we need to put in some work and do this together. We need to hold each other accountable. We had unlearning and accountability partners. Maybe we need unlearning and accountability partners in RDAP in general. I'm not sure. And at first I thought we were like saturating the readings, but there's like so many of us on so many different levels of different places where we are. I mean, we can do this. And so I'm really excited that this has started. I hope it continues. It is a big time investment, but there is always time for the right thing.
Excellent. Excellent. Anyone else want to add anything to? Okay. So our next question is for Deb and Lucy. Looking ahead, what recommendations do you have for sustaining the momentum generated by the workshops and ensuring continued commitment to advancing racial equity within the RDAP community?
Thinking about what Wanda was saying about making mistakes, I think what was sort of meaningful or important to me about this training was kind of the combination of education and reading with also sort of space for discussion and reflection and kind of in a trusting and, a space where you could be vulnerable. I think that sort of pairing of the group workshop with that, one-on-one partnership was sort of an important kind of counterpoint to have that space. So I think that's something that, the community could consider as a model going forward, like how can we incorporate those principles? And I think also just, being able to, be brave and stand up if we see something that doesn't feel quite right, or it might be problematic, even if, it's a colleague or someone we otherwise trust and look up to. I think, that's an important skill for all of us to grow.
So I think one thing that would be really great is to continue offering something like this for the RDAP community. And I'm also thinking about like, how can we kind of adapt it so that we can teach it to the people we are supporting? Because I imagine most of us are supporting researchers who are collecting the data, and we're in a position, often literally in a position of teaching. So we should all think about incorporating this into all of our teachings and consultations and services, just all these lessons.
Yeah, I think that's a great point that you make too with the, working with researchers as well. A lot of times, they're in a time crunch. They're working 80 hours a week on lots of different grants and funded projects. And then thinking about their bandwidth in terms of like, okay, so what do I have to do for compliance? And to jump through these hoops to make sure that I'm complying with these particular, if I'm working with sensitive data. And on the other hand, how do I ensure that I'm doing my data collection and research design ethically in this way that's not just ethical, that's not just a compliance mechanism, but it also takes into account these principles, these DEIA principles, and ensuring that there is no harm being done to the communities that I am working with and working with their particular data. Yeah, I think that's really important. And we have a couple of questions, we also have some comments in the chat here. I guess I can go with some of the oh, where was that? Oh, yes. Okay, so this was a really good question that was answered by Mara. I just want to read it out real quick and see if anyone else has any other thoughts here. Thank you, Mara, for your comments already, which is great. With regard to the A and the DEIA, a long overdue inclusion in this practice, in my opinion, how are you all introducing or trying to introduce accessibility into data curation? Practically, from the repos you use to the formatting of specific data objects, are you seeing adherence to standards from data producers and your colleagues, or maybe getting suggestions / demands for improvements in those standards? Does anyone have anything else to add to this question about data curation in particular? Speaking from my perspective, we do not have a data curation. I am the sole data services librarian at my institution, and we don't curate data.
So I'd like to say a little bit about this. Accessibility is kind of my personal piece of DEIA.
Yeah.
So kind of a couple things, really practical thing. I saw a webinar last year from a blind researcher on how they actually share data. And there's another concept called data sonification, which is very interesting. And it's what it sounds like. It's turning data into sound. So like a line on a graph will have a pitch that goes up and down based on how the line goes. So that, for example, so that's just one thing. But yeah, so that's one very specific particular thing I've been thinking about. And then just kind of a side note, like neurodivergent folks in general are more likely to be those squeaky wheels. So let's be their car horns and listen to them. Yeah, as I've been reading up on this because I'm neurodivergent myself, but like there's like a strong sense of needing fairness, like almost compulsively for neurodivergent people. So they're going to be noticing it and pointing it out. And so like just if you hear people saying the same thing over and over and over, don't write them off. They probably have a good point, and just approach them with curiosity about it.
Yeah, if I may,
Awesome. Yeah.
I haven't broken in yet, but just
Yeah.
a thing to add to that. I think it's certainly a very good question about the accessibility component, and also just a little bit of clarification. These particular workshops that were designed by Sophia Long, as Mara mentioned, I believe Mara was you who answered it. Yeah, in the Q&A, the A in that is focus on anti-racism because that is Sophia's specialization, and that is what these are for. These were only 3 workshops, and they were meant, and I said something like this in the Q&A portion because I didn't want to take the opportunity to answer out of the Q&A for any other. I didn't realize multiple people could answer, so I guess I could have done that. But there's only so much that you can do in just 3 workshops, right? And the goal of these were to introduce some very introductory concepts to really kind of hone in on things like what we mean when we talk about the systematization, the legalization of systemic oppression, right? The ways that it is to help really understand how to decouple ideas that a lot of people have that were intentionally right. So by such system, to think of isms as individual acts between people based on like having just a bad black heart, just like a dark, like wish of ill intent on this other person, and understanding how much that it is. Well, that's certainly individual acts of prejudice are part of it when we are talking about systems, and especially for those of us who are data professionals, right? The ways in which we can use data for good in using anecdotes or anecdata, as I like to call it, to illustrate the systems, the larger data that shows like unequivocally that the systems are at play. So to bring that back again, sorry, this is why I was like, I shouldn't be on the panel, I'll just talk forever. They did invite me, by the way, just to be clear. I was like, I think the attendees should be able to talk. I personally want to hear what the attendees have to say without me taking up all the space. And Sophia also was not able to make it today as well. But to bring it back to the accessibility, that is not to say, which I think a fair critique can be made sometimes or often, but is often also unfairly made at a lot of DEIA work that is focused on anti-racism and race specifically, which some people perceive, and sometimes some people within the space do actively, right, overlook the accessibility component of it. But what I would like to point out is that these very introductory concepts in which we introduce alternative frameworks for thinking about some of these concepts, like the characteristics of white supremacy, some of which could be a little difficult for people who, maybe struggle with the literal phrasing of the concept itself, and how to break it down and to apply it to things, is to think about how the way we do things uphold these structures, to think in these alternative frameworks, which can be a foreign way of thinking, right? And can take some practice, it can take some doing to unlearn the structures that have been put in place around us, to then challenge them and push back against them. While again, I do think it's very valid to question, and I certainly do also, as BIPOC who is active in a lot of these DEIA spaces, to point out when we say, oh, we can't forget about accessibility. Like disability is one of the the identities and axes of oppression that can come for anyone, no matter how you were born, right? And if you're fortunate enough to live into to old age, it will come for you eventually in some form or other. It affects all of us. And understanding similarly structurally how disability is legally constructed and is very much focused around labor, and disability identity. If you get into the writings, how much of that the legal construction and such is about your whether or not you are disabled from the workforce, and what, especially in American society, what that then permits you into and bars you from, because of the way the workforce and labor is so tied into access to healthcare and all of these other things, right? But you cannot begin to unpack that unless you begin to understand what we mean by systems of oppression and decouple that from individual acts of oppression, or individual acts of prejudice. So that was too long, but I just wanted to put that in there. Very important. To do agree, RDAP should do so much more with that. But just wanted to make sure, like, it's not that that was an ignored point here. It's just that you can't even begin to get to that unless you lay those foundations first.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks for that, Deborah. Wanda, did you want to answer? There was a question here. Were there suggestions on how to create a more welcoming environment?
Quick, sorry, could I just do one follow-up to the last question? So I think part of the problem is the acronym. So maybe something very specifically we can be intentional about is defining the A that we're talking about when we're talking about this. Because I'll be very frank, I only just now realized that we were using the A to mean anti-racism in the acronym. Like, I knew the workshops were anti-racism, but like, I'm so steeped in accessibility, like it totally went over my head that we weren't using the A that way. So yeah, we'll need to be very careful about that, because I think, at least in my experience, which might be well, which is largely white, the A means accessibility. And I don't know outside of whiteness what is more common.
I can try to answer that. It was I accidentally clicked it and you can't unclick it.
Oh no. Okay.
So were there suggestions on how to create more welcoming environment? Again, we were just really focusing on learning and getting all on the same page about these systems of oppression. And it's, you know, I live in Minnesota. We have this phrasing saying Minnesota nice, and it's actually kind of the opposite. It's so like kindness can go a long way, you know, like I hope that we can do these in person. It's hard to be as welcoming online as it is in person. Invite people to do projects with you, or to learn from people about their interests. We need to like provide examples and that are not just centered on whiteness. This is a very big question, and I don't have the answers, and I'm making mistakes here. I would love to have people put into the chat if they have ideas. Like, we just need to learn the systems of oppression and how they work and how to counter them, and try to lift each other up. We're all here because of other people, and we can be better at this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the first steps on suggestions on how to create a more welcoming environment is really showing up, you know, from a very basic, you know, we say this when we're talking about, you know, other organizations are getting involved in things, but I think it is something that is, you know, extremely valuable, is showing up and then listening. And those two things can create environments, you know, that allow for dialogue. And I think that that's really, you know, an important thing that we are doing here. We have a couple more questions. And so the first one is from anonymous attendee. This is a kind of a self-centered question, but I think it's important. Did you talk about how you move on and forgive yourself after you've made a mistake in working with library or data patrons? assuming you have apologized for the mistake, what are your personal next steps? And I think this is for anyone.
Yeah, I can say it makes me think of one of the white supremacy culture characteristics we talked about was perfectionism. And so this feeling that we have to do everything right all the time. And yeah, I think apology is important. And I know there are people who have written about how to do apology well, and what components are necessary for a real apology. I don't know that off the top of my head right now. But I think a next step for me would be to educate myself further about whatever it was that I made a mistake about and take responsibility for making sure it doesn't happen again, or if the mistake has implications for how I'm doing things or policies or practices, to follow up on that.
Anyone else have any? I like that, the bringing in the perfectionism here as well. I think, we are, constantly grappling with this idea of perfectionism and wanting things to be perfect, which goes along with a lot of some of the other things that we've talked about, including, loving checklists and things like that are kind of easy to do, right? And then we can check things off our boxes. Rachel has her hand up. Rachel?
Yeah, I just wondered if it might be helpful. There were a couple of questions about sort of what RDAP is doing or is going to do or how we're making those decisions. And so since I'm the current president, I wondered if it would be helpful if I hopped in. But
Perfect.
This is definitely the beginning of a long process and a commitment. It's not an end point. And as many others have pointed out, these workshops, and the reason we decided to start with workshops, I know there are a couple of questions about sort of who is underrepresented within RDAP and what can we do to change that. And I think I know we intentionally decided that rather than trying by starting to recruit people, what we need to do is make sure that RDAP is a space where we have a high enough baseline of knowledge around what that looks like and that we're on the same page about how systemic those things are so that we're creating a place that is safe to invite people into. And so these trainings were part of how we're trying to operationalize that. I'm really excited. The trainings just finished. I was also attending them, although I'm not on this panel, and it's really great to hear folks talking about them. I think a lot of ideas are coming up and I'm feeling excited about next steps. I think we'll probably as leadership talk about what that will look like, whether that will be webinars, town halls, task force, might be a number of different types of things. And also that we're going to be looking to our community and to you all to membership to participate in those, because RDAP is completely volunteer run, because the leadership turns over, and anybody who was in the workshops or who wasn't in the workshops might be in leadership, that we're going to be looking at one of the differences between the audiences that Sophia usually teaches us to, I believe, is that they're usually located in the same workplace, and RDAP is a different type of environment. And so there are some ways in which that's challenging, right? Because we don't work together and this isn't paid work. And there are other ways in which it's really exciting because we really get to shape RDAP what we want it to be. There's no top level administrators who aren't doing the work that we do, telling us we can't do it. So sorry. Yeah, I'll stop talking.
Well, that is a great note to end on since it is 15 after the hour. Mara, did you have anything else?
No, I think, yeah, I had a wrap up slide, but we don't have to put that up on the screen. I think Rachel's wrap up was really, really nice. We are hoping to potentially share out some resources from the workshop, so watch for that. And then just the standard kind of RDAP wrap up. So thank you to our panelists and our audience for participating. There is a 15-minute break, and then there's a game night starting at 4:30 Eastern time. And this has been really fun the last few years. So you can find the Zoom link for that in the Feed Loop Sessions tab. So thank you, everyone.